With the crisis on the southern border intensifying and governors coming out in support of Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Convention of States senior advisor Rick Santorum and co-founder Mark Meckler penned a startling new op-ed for the Daily Wire on how Convention of States could solve the border crisis.
Under the third prong of our application, which is limiting the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government, you could give concurrent jurisdiction to the states to enforce the borders and enforce immigration law. We have 19 states that have weighed in on this resolution. If 15 states join us, we could be literally in convention in 30 days. We could pass an amendment that says the states have this concurrent jurisdiction, and Texas could lock their borders down, and there would be no question about whether they had the right to do this. So,
on February 6, 3 states held hearings on Convention of States, first in Iowa. The COS action resolution passed in Iowa House Subcommittee 2-1. Rick Santorum gave impassioned testimony.
I fought a lot of battles, but in the end, I failed, and I couldn't walk away. You can't walk away if you spend 30 years of your life trying to solve something and fail at it and just walk away and say, well, let's leave it to someone else to clean up the mess. Unlike some, I actually have a lot of belief in the founders. And unlike some, I believe the entire Constitution should be used, not just the ones that people like. And the entire Constitution is Article 5. And Article 5 was put in there for such a time as this.
The following morning, the Iowa House State Affairs Committee voted 12-11 to advance the resolution to the Iowa House floor. The next step is a debate and a vote by the Iowa House on Convention of States. Later on February 6, the COS Ohio grassroots team showed up in huge numbers to give testimony for the second hearing on our resolution in Ohio.
I stand before you today to urge a vote and passage HJR 3, which focuses on supporting a balanced budget, establishing term limits for federal legislatures, and for limiting the overreaching power and jurisdiction of our federal government.
And amending Convention of States is a safety feature packed into our Constitution by our founders for this moment in history. You raised your right hand to uphold the Constitution of the United States. This includes an Article 5 Convention of the States, which exist as part of that Constitution.
In addition to those who gave oral testimony, 63 proponents submitted written testimony. Convention of States Action co-founder Michael Ferris gave expert testimony and fielded lots of questions from the committee members.
What is your understanding or your belief as to how delegates to such a convention would be selected?
They will be selected by the legislature, that is a certainty. Because what it is a convention of states. That's what the founders called it. The first application was from Virginia in 1788.
Later that evening on February 6th, the COS Rhode Island grassroots team testified in support of our resolution before the House committee.
An out-of-control Congress is what we have now in a $34 trillion debt. Does anyone really think Congress will ever propose any kind of fiscal restraints or a balanced budget amendment or any other amendment that will restrict its powers? We don't have to accept the shackles of the status quo that we have now. It is time to enact Article 5 and call for a Convention of States.
The committee voted to hold it for further study. On February 7th, the COS South Dakota activist team gave testimony before the Senate State Affairs Committee on SJR 508, the COS action resolution. Unfortunately, the committee narrowly voted to kill our resolution by a vote of 5-4. In other COS news, the Ohio team sent 700-plus messages to their state legislators helping to achieve a final override of the governor's veto of EP06, which prohibits transgender surgeries on children and protects girls' sports. In Iowa, an Article 5 commissioner governance legislation was reported favorably from a House subcommittee and the full House State Affairs Committee. Meanwhile, the COS Maryland team held their surge at the Capitol. Our model commissioner legislation was introduced in the Maryland Senate with 5 sponsors. 2 Virginia Senate committees held hearings on the 2 components of our model commissioner legislation. Unfortunately, both bills were defeated there in Virginia. The West Virginia House Committee on Senior, Children, and Family Issues held a hearing on HB 4313, which is a Parent's Bill of Rights. That's being supported by the COS West Virginia team. After moving from California to Texas, the Article 5 Outfitters store held a grand reopening this week. And finally, here's some snapshots from COS events going on around the country, including from Oklahoma and Michigan to Massachusetts, Maine, and New Jersey. And now you're up to date with Convention of States.